In Colorado, we did some different kind of analysis. We actually looked at all the dropouts, or all the students in 2006-07, which is the last year of data that we had, and we compared dropout. Then we took them back in time, and again, you have to have districts that are willing to share the data with you, and actually it goes back that far, and so. We wanted to get back to 9th grade. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough data in all the districts because they changed the way they were doing attendance. And so this graph shows you the difference between dropouts and graduates in chronic absenteeism, defined as actually 90% attendance or missing 20 or more days. And you can see that the year before the dropout outcome, there was a huge difference between students who would eventually drop out and students who would eventually graduate. And we think the same, very similar pattern would be the case if we had 9th grade attendance, which is a really better indicator. This next slide looks at the behavior of the B out of the ABCs, and this was the percentage of dropouts with at least one suspension in 4 years. Percentage of students. We looked at dropouts versus students who graduated. Again, you can see not quite as big a difference, but again, a very significant difference between the groups. The most predictive was 9th grade failure. Okay, here you see that almost 80%, more than three quarters of all the dropouts in all those districts had at least one semester F. That's not a course F. That's a semester F. And then huge difference between them and the graduates. There were some graduates who had Fs, but not as many. Okay. This next slide looks at the data somewhat differently. Remember I told you we took students and followed them back in time. This time we took students in 03-04 and followed them forward in time 4 years till their on-time graduation. And we compared the findings in Colorado to what had been found in Chicago, and basically it's the same thing. On the bottom you have going up just one semester by semester in 9th grade, and then it's the percentage of students who actually graduated. And we subtracted out the transfers, and you can see that it goes, there's a big drop between 0 and 1. It flattens out a little bit. By 5 or more semester failures, you're getting 10% of students who are graduating on time. It probably would have bumped up somewhat if we'd been able to do an extra year, those 5th-year graduates and 6th. But most of the research we've done in other places is that there's not a whole lot of 5th and 6th-year graduates. Most students are not sticking it out quite that long. Okay, so knowing these ABCs, the early warning indicators, is an important first step. And this has become quite widespread. We're finding it all over the internet. Everybody's talking about the ABCs now. It came from Bob Balfont's, but I'm glad everybody's using it now. But now we have to go beyond just thinking about these indicators to establishing effective early warning systems and making timely interventions to prevent dropout outcomes. So how can we do this in a systematic, integrated way? We've focused, we've got the ABCs of dropout indicators, we've got the ABCs of dropout prevention, and a lot of this is, I'll show you the next, is summarized in the Grad Nation Toolkit, which you can get access to. I think there's a link from the Kansas Drop-In site. Now, my colleagues Bob Balfont and Joanna Fox were instrumental in getting that done for America's Promise. But just going back here, the A is for analyzing. First, we've analyzed the data, but then the next step is to analyze the existing policies and practices within schools related to attendance, behavior, and course grading, and credit recovery, and all those things. And so this has to be a systematic thing that schools and districts go through, and it's not just a school issue, because a lot of the problems are not just in the high schools, they're in the middle grades leading up to the high schools as well. And so schools and districts need to do this really systematic analysis, and there's lots of tools in the Grad Nation kit for that. The B is, I put in a B for building consensus, because a lot of times there's a lot of conflict over what should be done. I mean, everybody agrees that we need to prevent dropouts, but how to do that. If you get into the nitty-gritty of grading policies and things like that, you get a lot of resistance. And so you really do need to spend time helping people to understand, the implications of these things, building consensus. You cannot just force, policies that we think work on people who don't understand the need for them. So there's a building consensus stage that takes a while. And finally, C is for creating integrated school structures that are going to assure that these appropriate and timely interventions actually get delivered to the students in a timely way. And that's what I want to focus on. You can go to the Grad Nation Toolkit for more information on the A and the B there, but I'm going to spend the rest of my time now focusing on the C, creating integrated structures. And we've got this pyramid here, and this is why I talk about a public health. If you look at lots of public health models, they're this prevention pyramid with a big base that's focused on prevention. So at the base of our approach is basically comprehensive school reform, preventing the majority of problems for majority of students. And this has been happening a lot throughout the country, but what we're adding to it, and it's becoming more and more popular now, is this idea of an early warning system that has to be at the base of this prevention. And then further up the pyramid, first you have targeted interventions that are less intensive. And only when those do not work do you do the intensive kind of interventions within schools. Now, all this sounds pretty familiar, I think, to many of you. It looks like those of you who are from schools will say RTI, response to intervention. Okay, they have a pyramid. Or PBIS, positive behavior intervention systems. Anybody, is that familiar language to anybody out there? Yeah. And I know, Jessica was just telling me, and I think I had seen this before, that Kansas has the multi-tiered support system. So this might all be very, very familiar to many of you. And indeed, it may well be happening in most of your schools. I'm not completely sure, but that's the analysis part of analyzing to see to what extent all of this is well integrated. Because what we find generally, I'm going to skip over that, is that there's a lot of things happening in schools. There's a lot of programs. I've talked to principals who've got, I got this mentoring program and this one, and the university, University of Baltimore's coming in, and the University of Maryland, and some principals, it's exciting to get all that energy and support, but for a principal, frankly, it's a lot. They're juggling 24 programs, and if each program needs its own evaluation, basically, that's a lot of hassle to the school to have to deal with 24 different program evaluations at once. And so what we have been arguing is that it's crucial to get an integrated approach to all of this. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the things you do at the prevention foundation of the program, and then talk a little bit more about how we're doing the interventions. A lot of this looks familiar to you. There's the best practices, basically. At high school, in middle school and high school, the important thing of personalization of the school organization, getting smaller learning communities. I have to say that many people think small schools are the answer, and there's research on both sides. In Baltimore, unfortunately, they broke up all the big comprehensive high schools into small high schools, and it really did not work. I've been talking to, in some schools that, some schools are doing better than others, but there's schools where the attendance is actually down to like 50%. It's really, just being smaller does not necessarily guarantee that you're going to get better results. There has to be a lot of focus on the curriculum and instruction, especially in places where, places where the dropout problem is concentrated have high numbers of students who are behind grade level, high concentration of student need. And so there's a lot of attention that needs to be paid to how do we actually accelerate learning so these students can catch up. And so we've been doing a lot of work at our center developing curricula that can actually do that. Sometimes you have to double dose, triple dose. There's lots of different things out there. There's a website that I think is there's a link to it on the Kansas Drop-ins that has a lot of these kinds of components and the research behind them and more specific information about them. It's not just curriculum and instruction, it's staff support. And besides good leadership, we need time for teams of teachers, and we really emphasize the importance of teams of teachers working together, sharing students. And they need common planning time, they need coaching for how to make their common planning time work really well, and they need the kind of support and continual support to be able to make this work in places where the need is really high. Okay, but we do have lots of evidence. A lot of this is on What's Works Clearinghouse, if you're familiar with the government of Department of Ed website that's looking at programs, of the kinds of work that we've been doing in our